So this warm-up is actually what we are learning today in our lesson, but I bet we can do most of these without the information from today's lesson, from our information from Friday. All right, give the most specific name for each quadrilateral. Number 1, okay, so we know that opposite sides are parallel. There's our hand sign, and so therefore it's a parallelogram. But then we know there's icing on that cake. All sides are congruent. 7 equals 7 equals 7 equals 7. So a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides is a rhombus. Number 2, okay, what do we know? We know angle A is congruent to angle C, but we learned that's not enough to say it's a parallelogram. You can't have one pair of opposite angles congruent. What else do we need? We would need the other pair. Is angle B congruent to angle D? Is it? They threw us for a loop there. They didn't put just one arc and one arc, right? But if you are ever in doubt, you can always make up numbers. Let's say that this angle was 20 and this angle was 60. That would be a measure of 80 degrees, right? Well, if this has one arc and it's 20, that has one arc, so it would have to be 20. The other one has double arc and it's 60, so it has a double arc and it would have to be 60. So there we go. Opposite angles are congruent, therefore it is a parallelogram. Number 3, we have a parallelogram. That's what the arrows mean. Parallelogram with one right angle. Oh, we're going to learn today if that's enough or not, but we'll actually learn right now in the warm-up. One right angle. Well, it's a parallelogram, so opposite angles are congruent, right? Cool. It's a parallelogram, so consecutive angles are supplementary. So the supplement of 90 is 90, and then opposite angles are congruent. Cool. It is a rectangle. Number 4. I have 4 right angles. Is it a parallelogram, though? We have to make sure. Okay, a parallelogram would mean opposite angles are congruent, 90 is congruent to 90, 90 is congruent to 90. Phew! Okay, so it's a parallelogram with 4 right angles. Definitely a rectangle again. All right, and number 5, finally, we have opposite sides parallel, so it's a parallelogram. And then we have all congruent sides. So it is a rhombus. None of these are squares. None of these are squares, because a square would have to be a rectangle and a rhombus. And that's kind of what we're learning today. So 4 was a rectangle, 5 was a rhombus, because in number 5 we didn't know the angles. I don't know the angles. And in number 4 we don't know the side lengths. So not enough information in either of them. I know what your quiz is over today, a little bit. Circle the quadrilaterals that are parallelograms. So on your quiz, you'll be solving for missing angles and missing sides, but you'll also have to say, do we have enough information to say that this is a parallelogram? So let's look at the ones that were given. Look at A. Do we have enough information to say that it is a parallelogram? Good, good. The answer is no. So we would not circle it. Just having one pair of consecutive angles supplementary is not enough. For all we know, that could be a trapezoid or something else other than, or it could be a nothing actually. It does not have to be a parallelogram. Look at B. Yes or no? That's doing one of the properties, opposite angles congruent. So I circle it. What about C? Diagonals bisect each other. Yep, that's a parallelogram. What about D? Not enough information. Once again, that could be a trapezoid. That is a trapezoid. Look at E. Yes, opposite sides are congruent. Both pairs, very important, of opposite sides are congruent. What about F? You had it all ready to go. F is a kite, so it's no. And what about G? Also a no. Not enough information You have to have both pairs of opposite angles congruent. All right. Put these in your notes. We are going to write this kind of where we wrote the checklist to say if it's a parallelogram. Now we have a checklist to say if it's a rectangle or not, and we'll have one for rhombus and we'll have one for square. So write this down in your notes really quickly. I'm given a picture, and I think it's a rectangle. What do I need to check to make sure it's a rectangle? Do I have to check all of its properties? No. I only have to check one of these things. If this one's true, it's over. It's a rectangle. If this one's true, it's over. It's a rectangle. So you only have to show that one angle is a right angle. We went over why in the warm-up today. Done talking about that. And you would have to show that the diagonals are congruent to each other. Yes, you would have to know the length of both of the diagonals. What word do both of those phrases start with? Parallelogram. That means they have to be a parallelogram to start with. They have to be a parallelogram. So parallelogram with one right angle, parallelogram with congruent diagonals. Is the quadrilateral a rectangle? So let's try out our new little checklist. Scenario A. EF is congruent to GF. FG is congruent to HE. And FH is congruent to GE. Is scenario A a rectangle? What do you think, guys? So in the previous slide, we wrote down it has to be a parallelogram with congruent diagonals. The answer to this one is no. Why is the answer no? What is wrong? What's wrong? It wasn't a parallelogram to start with. You're right. So it has one pair of opposite sides congruent, has a third side congruent. It doesn't have both pairs of opposite sides congruent. It just doesn't. And so that's why it's no. For all we know, I'm sorry I keep using my trapezoid example. For all we know, this could be a trapezoid with congruent diagonals. It could be. All right, scenario B. This angle is 45 and this angle is 50. Is that a rectangle? Absolutely not. They would have to add up to 90 to be a rectangle. All right, next one. What does it take to be a rhombus? Write it down quickly. So let's dive into these. What does it have to be? Well, notice, once again, they all start with parallelogram. You have to start with a parallelogram, like a blank canvas, like that's your canvas. You start with a parallelogram. Oh, look at that. You only have to show that one pair of consecutive sides are congruent, because by the parallelogram properties, then the other ones will be as well. So you kind of only have to show that two sides are congruent as long as they're consecutive, okay? You have to show the diagonals are perpendicular. Well, that's one of the properties anyway. Ooh, and then you only have to show that one diagonal bisects the angles. You only have to show that one diagonal bisects the angles. So we're getting away with a little bit. We can be a little bit lazy here. We don't have to be as thorough as the properties tell us to be. One pair of consecutive congruent sides, perpendicular diagonals, and one diagonal that bisects the angles. All right, so this kind of looks like the warm-up again. Are these parallelograms rectangle, rhombi, or neither? So look at that. They are telling us straight up that they are parallelograms. They're parallelograms. We want to know if they're rectangles, rhombi, or neither. So look at A. Look at your list you just wrote. That's a parallelogram with one right angle. Can we say it's a rectangle? Is that enough? Absolutely enough. It is a rectangle. Good. What about B? And those are congruent marks. Okay, so it's a parallelogram and the diagonals are bisecting the angles. Yep, it is a rhombus. What about C? It's a parallelogram with congruent diagonals. It is a rectangle. Yep. What about D? D's a neither, right? D's a neither because it's just a plain old parallelogram. What about E? rhombus, right? F, neither, plain old parallelogram. And G. Okay, so you need to be able to do this slide without looking at your properties for tomorrow. Not for today's quiz, but for tomorrow. G is a rhombus because the diagonals are bisecting each other. Excuse me. All right, last one. To prove it's a square, what do we need? To prove that a quadrilateral is a square, notice it didn't even say to prove a parallelogram is a square. Cool. To prove that a quadrilateral is a square, it is sufficient to show that it's both a rectangle and a rhombus. So that's all you need to do. You need to take a four-sided figure, which is a quadrilateral, prove it's a rectangle, prove it's a rhombus, you're done. It's a square. So write that down. You don't have to write all those words, all those letters.